From basically fuck all happening for the last few weeks, we suddenly seem to have arrived on things that have got my attention, or at least gotten my goat. So let's crack on, shall we? Ghostbusters dropped another new trailer, which looks to be about as bad as the first one. But what's been interesting hasn't been the trailer, which I think we all could have predicted was going to be rubbish, but the ongoing battles and reactions around it. And this is going to be the theme for this week's episode, really. You see, a guy made a YouTube video, part of his channel, he regularly does movie reviews and so on, explaining in considerable detail exactly why he wasn't going to watch the new Ghostbusters. And at no point in any of that video did the issue of sexism come up. But you wouldn't know that, because apparently any objection to what appears to be, from the trailer and everything known about it, to be a shit film, it doesn't matter what you say, doesn't matter what you think, even if you articulate it, even if you put yourself out there, no, it must be sexism. I mean, that's now, the original trailer is the most disliked YouTube trailer in history. Some of that's going to be brigading, some of that's going to be because people made a fuss about it, but even so, on that scale, that's still pretty significant. But we can't have a discussion about why. You know, we can't talk about what's wrong with it, why it's made a bad impression, or any of that, because anything you say doesn't matter. They'll just call you a sexist. They'll say it's sexism. And they've pinned this entire movie's success on that. I don't think that's exactly a clever move, because that's just further antagonise people. It's certainly lots of free publicity, but contrary to what you may have been told, not all publicity is good publicity. So I just don't know what to make of the whole thing. You know, if you're pegging the entire sale of your movie on identity politics, then you're creating a problem. If you just leave it and understand that people aren't liking it because it looks shit, far and away the overwhelming majority of people are in that camp, then maybe we can talk about it. Maybe we can move away from these kinds of remakes. Maybe we can get better films. Maybe the film itself could be improved with reshoots and re-edits and so on, based on these actual genuine criticisms. That'd be good, wouldn't it? You know, an all-female Ghostbusters is a shit pitch, though, really. You know, Rule 63 Ghostbusters, as an elevator pitch, it's understandable, it's comprehensible, but that's, you know, something you'd find on 4chan or Tumblr. It's not an exciting prospect for a movie. Yeah, there we are with that one. So, you can't criticise Ghostbusters in any way, shape or form, because no matter what you say, it's sexism. Then we've got Gencon, which is apparently somehow a big fuss at this point, even though it's, you know, almost strictly a tabletop gaming convention, though they've been widening in recent years. Up until now, the big news about the convention was that certain big companies were not going to be present. You know, that was what it was all about. But now suddenly there's news stories all over the net. Gencon makes this big step to show that gaming is inclusive by having a 50% panel of women. This is Industry Insiders is a thing that you can apply for if you work in the industry, and then Gencon will invite you in and you do panels and presentations and so on, and are treated as a minor celebrity. But it's, you apply. So it doesn't seem that particularly there was any real agenda going on here, but you wouldn't know that from the way it was reported, from the way people were crowing about it on social media and so on. You'd think this was prosecuting some kind of agenda. Now, we don't have particularly good data on what the gender split in the tabletop gaming audience is. The closest we have is a somewhat flawed marketing survey done by Wizards of the Coast back in about 2000, around the launch of 3rd edition, where they were trying to work out what the audience was. And back then, it was about 20% women. I don't doubt that's gone up since then, but I suspect that people working in the industry is going to be lagging behind that. So let's just assume, for sake of argument, that the demography of gamers is still that. You know, it probably isn't, but let's just pretend that it is. So a representative set of people attending a con to talk about the industry and so on would be, if the general gaming population were reflected in industry professionals, 80-20. That would be representative. 50-50 is not representative. It's not necessarily bad, it's not necessarily wrong, but you've got people crying about it as if it was this great big win for gender equality or whatever. And then on the other side, you've got people who are now suspicious and upset and think that this is part of an agenda. I've been trying to get the two sides to understand where each other are coming from, but it's virtually impossible to get people to talk about this in any kind of sensible way whatsoever. I think there are genuine concerns amongst people who look at this and worry that an agenda's being pushed, and I think there's legitimate concerns on the side of people who want representation and so on. But one side just immediately condemns the others as SJWs, not necessarily without merit, and the other side, the SJW side, if you want to call it that, just instantly condemn the other side as misogynists without actually listening to their arguments. So that calls back to the Ghostbusters thing I was just talking about, you know? So, is there an issue here? Probably not, because you apply to be an industry insider and it doesn't look like there was any particular agenda going on, but the argument around it is still worth looking at and worth having, and looking at where these problems are and why people are at loggerheads over this, and why people are concerned. Okay, so say you're a new, young designer just starting out on your tabletop gaming career. Do you want the advice of the best people, the most famous people, the industry veterans, the ones with a proven track record? Or do you want it to be someone like you? You know, which, if you're a minority or of some sort or whatever, you know, which is actually going to be the most useful in terms of game knowledge, in terms of industry knowledge? Is it going to be the veteran, or is it going to be someone who happens to share your genitals or your skin colour or whatever? You know, if I was a new, young, black female game designer wanting to learn about the industry, wanting to learn how it works, how to get ahead in it, I'm not going to want to talk to someone who's just been chosen because of their identity. I'm going to want to talk to industry insiders, actual insiders, you know, people who know something, people who've produced a good body of work, who can teach me things about game design and how the industry works. Those are the kinds of people that I'm going to want to talk to. Surely that's where the greatest value is. So if you're compromising, and I'm not saying this is what's going on, I'm just saying this is where the concern might come in. If you're compromising on quality for the sake of being inclusive on the basis of identity, then you're doing a disservice to the designers, you're doing a disservice to the attendees of the convention, and you're doing a disservice to people who might want to work in the industry and want the best advice and the best knowledge. Now, the selection criteria here, we don't know. There might not even be any. It might just be first come, first served, or this, you know, it may have been a heavily biased sample this year of people who applied to do it. But that is a legitimate concern. And if you're a member of a minority or whatever, surely it's infantilizing and it reduces you down to that identity rather than your body of work or your capability to be chosen as a representative purely on the basis of your skin color rather than what you've done. You know? Doesn't that's even racist or sexist or homophobic or whatever. If you're just being reduced down to your identity, what you are, not who you are, not what you've done, that seems to me to be a huge leap backwards in terms of equality. I mean, I've been saying to people, I think things were better in the 90s. We had not too different in terms of demography, at least at the conventions that I've attended, but it wasn't an issue. You know, you were there to play games, and far and away the greater majority of people didn't give a shit about anything else other than sit down, play the game. Cool, you're a gamer. That was, you know, the gamer identity was the one that mattered in the context of the gaming industry. And this fixation on identity has, in my opinion, made relations worse. With specific regard to this, you know, now people have these somewhat legitimate worries that people are being given positions or speaking engagements or so on, not because of what they've done, how good they are, or whatever, but simply because they have ovaries or more melanin in their skin or whatever. And that creates a suspicion and greater friction between people on these bases of identity that wasn't there before. So, to my mind, it's hugely counterproductive. Now, we don't know that this is going on. It probably isn't particularly, but it does go on in other areas, and it does create these concerns. And these concerns, whether you agree that they're valid or not, are legitimate concerns. And the way to deal with that is, in my humble opinion, not to misogynist. It's not to do that. It's to explain. Yeah, try and understand the other point of view. And I think I understand both points of view in this, and I think there's room for people to understand each other, at least, even if they can't come to agreement. But you got to make that step. And sticking with tabletop gaming for the last item, there's a new hashtag campaign, Not at My Table. Now this sounds like a fantastic idea, in that the idea is that you're saying, well, if you come and play at my table, there'll be no bullying, no racism, no nastiness to people at my gaming table. But this basically seems to be a reaction to the Tumblr post from, I guess it's a month or two back, that was just full of these, yeah, that happened, kind of stories, apocryphal anecdotes about horrible things happening at conventions to this one person over many years. It wasn't particularly believable. It runs completely against a lot of people's experiences. I wrote a blog post, I didn't even bother trying to engage it. I just gave my anecdotes of positive things that had happened in gaming. But this idea, this not at my table thing, seems to be a reaction to that. And as with that previous post, people were really kind of overly willing to jump on board and say, yes, tabletop gaming's terrible, but, I'm taking a stand against it. This kind of virtue signaling, I'm one of the good guys thing going on. But as with that, I don't think people have taken time to really think about it or how these things have gone before. I think, certainly in my experience, certainly in my peer group's experience, certainly in my broader experience, and I've been to cons and stuff in America, Europe, I know people all over the world who play games. It completely runs counter to their experience. That's anecdotal as well, but an anecdote versus an anecdote seems like a fair fight. I think that gaming has always been very welcoming and has always been ahead of society in terms of being welcoming and understanding and so on. It's probably down to the fact that gamers have tended to be more educated because you have to be interested in reading and writing and mathematics and all the rest of it to be in it. So it's going to trend to a slightly more intelligent, slightly more liberal, slightly more educated audience on the whole. So I think that's true. I mean, D&D got its big start in universities. So this rush to kind of self-flagellate, yeah, we're terrible, we're awful, we're nasty, we're horrible to women, we're racist, I'm sorry I'm white, I'm sorry I'm male. It's just kind of disgusting and sickening. And yet if you step up and say, hey, wait a minute, I don't think it's quite as bad as you're saying it is, somehow you're denying the problem or perpetuating the problem or something, rather than offering a note of caution or reason. And so it is with not at my table. The idea that you're banishing bullying or whatever and so on from your table is good, but that happens anyway. But if you look at the tag on Twitter and you consider the broader argument around it, it goes beyond that. This is not dissimilar to how anti-harassment policies, who's for harassment anyway, how anti-harassment policies at conventions have been used to smuggle in censorship and other things. And so you look at the not at my table and you see things that start to impact on creativity and the fun of the game. People saying, I should be able to interrupt and stop something that makes me uncomfortable. Well, why the fuck are you playing the game in the first place? Why are you sitting down to a game of blood about chainsaw mass murderers if you can't stand that sort of thing and it's going to make you triggered? In your home group, this kind of shit is never going to come up in the first place. At games at shops or games at conventions, you've got sign-up sheets. You know the kind of game that you're getting into, So why should you get to disrupt everyone else's fun because, I don't know, you're thin-skinned or whatever it is? That's a horrible thing to say, but why should one person get to fuck up a game for everyone else at the table? And why should we eliminate racist villains or sexist villains from our table? Why should we remove grotesque monsters. You know, if we're playing a horror game, then I'm going to try and gross you out. I'm going to try and scare you. That's the point of the game. Why do we get on roller coasters? It's to be scared and terrified and exhilarated. Why do we play games? For the challenge, for the experience of being in another situation, another context. You know, fighting the bad guys, winning out. And if you remove anything bad happening, if you remove any threat, then what game do you have left? And this is the concern, that these bad ideas are piggybacking on the good idea of, right, we're not going to have any bullying or shitty behaviour around the table. But reality and fantasy are two separate things, and bad shit happening in games makes for games, makes for challenge, you know? So, can we just, please, be a little bit more cautious and a little bit more positive about gaming? Because gaming is a great space. It's always been inclusive. It's always been open to anyone, sometimes to our detriment. You know, there's plenty of good things to say about gaming, and we're better than many other spaces. Could we be better? Yes. But by censoring ourselves and making our games dull, boring, unchallenging, uninteresting, I think not, baby puppy. And that was the geek that was.